I am not a property that can be bought. The words left Sheila Stevens' mouth steady, deliberate, even as her pulse hammered against her throat. Across the mahogany desk, massive, dark, polished to a mirror shine, Mauricio Abate finally looked up from the document he'd been reading. The amber light from the desk lamp caught the sharp angles of his face, turned his eyes into something ancient and unforgiving. Your father already signed the paper, Bella. His voice was dangerously quiet, each syllable wrapped in that Sicilian accent that made even simple words sound like threats. I'm simply collecting the collateral, which is you. Sheila's hands clenched into fists at her sides, nails biting into her palms hard enough to ground her. $10 million. That's what her father owed this man. That's what James Stephen had gambled away and used her as insurance. And now she stood in this glass tower in Manhattan, surrounded by men in expensive suits with guns under their jackets, like a piece of furniture waiting to be claimed. Then you're going to be disappointed, she said, lifting her chin, because I don't answer to anyone. Mauricio Abate's lips didn't quite smile. The expression was colder than that, sharper, like a blade testing skin before it cuts deep. You have 48 hours to produce $10 million, Miss Stephen. He leaned back in his chair, utterly in control. Or you produce yourself. As my wife. Welcome back, my beautiful souls and kindred spirits. Before we start, go ahead and subscribe, like, and share where you're watching from. It always warms my heart to see our little storytelling family stretch across the world. Every click, every comment, every bit of love you give helps us keep uncovering these unforgettable stories together. So find your quiet place, settle in, and let me take you somewhere you've never been before. Sheila had been halfway through her final year law exam when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost sent it to voicemail. She was 3 hours into a brutal civil procedure exam, her mind already spinning with case law and legal precedent. But something cold walked down her spine. Something that whispered, "Answer it." Miss Stephen. This is regarding a debt of $10 million registered under your name. The world stopped. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed too loud. Someone coughed 2 rows behind her. Her pen rolled off the desk and clattered to the floor like a countdown. $10 million. Nearly impossible to comprehend. Enough to bury her 16-year-old brother Jaden, and every dream she'd fought for. There's been a mistake. Her voice sounded distant, someone else's. I don't have any debts. Your father, James Stephen, listed you as guarantor on a private loan. The payment is 90 days overdue. You have 48 hours to settle the account, or we will proceed with alternative collection methods. The line went dead. Sheila sat frozen in that exam hall, her hand still gripping the phone, her mind fracturing. James. The man who'd walked out on their family 5 years ago to chase poker tables and bourbon dreams. The man she'd worked 3 jobs to support before finally cutting him off. He'd used her name, forged her signature, sold her future to fund his addiction. She tried calling him 17 times between the exam hall and her apartment. Every call went straight to voicemail, that same generic recording, his voice cheerful and oblivious. By the time the sun set, Sheila had learned the truth from his landlord in Brooklyn. James Stephen had fled the city 3 days ago, vanished like smoke, leaving his daughter to pay for his sins in ways that made her stomach turn to ice. They found her at her apartment at 8 p.m. 3 men, expensive suits that didn't quite hide the shape of weapons underneath. Too polite to be cops, too dangerous to be anything else. They didn't threaten, didn't need to. Just handed her a black card with an address in Midtown, one of those glass towers that kissed the clouds, and told her to be there by 8 p.m. the next night. Mr. Abate would like to discuss payment options, the one in the center said. His smile didn't reach his eyes. He's a reasonable man, when people cooperate. Sheila knew that name. Everyone who'd ever brushed against New York's underworld knew Mauricio Abate, the Sicilian, the Reaper. The man who'd consolidated the 5 families under one iron fist and a reputation for absolute terrifying control. People who crossed him didn't get warnings. They just disappeared, and their families learned not to ask questions. She should have run. Should have grabbed Jaden, emptied her pathetic savings account, and disappeared into the night. But running meant her little brother. Brilliant, vulnerable, dreaming of MIT, would become a target. Running meant Dr. Okonkwo, the immigration lawyer who'd mentored her through law school, would face consequences. Her father had made sure this debt touched everyone she loved. Made sure she was trapped. So the next night, at 8 p.m. sharp, wearing her only interview suit and carrying a heart full of rage, Sheila Stephen walked into the Lion's Den. The Abate organization headquarters didn't look like a crime syndicate. It looked like power. Glass and steel and old money. The kind of building where senators met mistresses and CEOs made backroom deals. She was escorted through a marble lobby by a man who moved like a predator in Hugo Boss into a private elevator that opened onto the top floor, the penthouse level, where the air itself felt thicker, heavier with consequence. The office she was led into was all dark wood and leather, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Manhattan skyline like a throne room surveying a kingdom. And there, behind that massive desk, sat Mauricio Abate. He was younger than she'd expected, 35 maybe, but his eyes were ancient, sharp, calculating, the kind of eyes that had watched men beg and hadn't blinked. His black hair was perfectly styled, his charcoal suit cut so precisely it was almost obscene. Tattoos crept up from his collar, dark ink against olive skin, serpents or scripture, she couldn't tell. He studied her like she was evidence in a case file. Something to evaluate and dismiss. "Sit," he said. A command, not an invitation. Sheila remained standing. "I'll stand." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or amusement. The two men flanking the door tensed, hands drifting toward their jackets. No one told Mauricio Abate no, not twice. "Your father owes me $10 million, Mauricio said, leaning back in his chair with the casual ease of someone who owned every second of this conversation. "He's gone. That makes you responsible. I never signed anything. Your signature is on the guarantor documents." He slid a black folder across the desk. His fingers were elegant, controlled, marked with scars that told stories he'd never speak aloud. "Forged or not, it's legal enough. And he offered you as collateral. I'm accepting." The words hit like bullets. Sheila forced herself to move, to open the folder with hands that trembled despite her best efforts. There it was. Her forged signature, her social security number, her life reduced to paperwork and a handwritten note in her father's scrawling cursive. "My daughter is worth more than money. She'll work it off." Bile crawled up her throat. Rage turned her vision white at the edges. "I am not a possession you can trade," she said, her voice low, shaking with fury. Mauricio tilted his head slightly, like she was a puzzle he was reconsidering. "You're either debt payment or a debtor. Choose." Sheila lifted her chin, met those cold, calculating eyes with every ounce of defiance she'd inherited from a mother who'd raised 2 kids alone and refused to break. "Then I'm a debtor. I'll pay you back myself. Every cent. With interest." For a long moment, Mauricio just watched her. Then that almost smile returned, colder and sharper than before. $10 million on a law student's salary. His voice carried the weight of dark amusement. "You'll be 90 before you clear it. And that's if I don't add interest daily, which I will. Then I'll be 90 and debt-free." Sheila shot back. Mauricio stood. The movement was liquid, predatory, and suddenly the desk between them felt like nothing at all. He circled around it with deliberate slowness, and Sheila's body screamed at her to step back, to run, to do anything but stand there as he stopped just close enough for her to smell expensive cologne and something darker underneath. Gunpowder, maybe, or old smoke. "You marry me," he said quietly, his accent turning each word into a dark promise. "The debt disappears. Your family stays safe. You keep your pride, more or less." Sheila actually laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that surprised even her. "Marry you? I'd rather spend my life drowning in debt than marry a gangster who thinks he can buy people." That's when his expression went deadly calm, the kind of calm that came before violence. Before someone made a decision that couldn't be undone. He pulled out his phone, swiped through it with those scarred, elegant fingers, then held it up to her face. Photographs. Jaden walking out of their apartment building, headphones in, backpack slung over one shoulder. Dr. Okonkwo leaving her office in Brooklyn. The elderly woman at the corner bodega who always gave Sheila extra change when she was short. Every person she loved, captured by cameras she'd never noticed. "Refuse," Mauricio said, his voice soft as a blade sliding between ribs. "And everyone in these photos becomes a collection target. Your brother's scholarship disappears. Dr. Okonkwo's practice faces sudden legal scrutiny about her immigration clients. The people you care about learn what it costs to be connected to you." His eyes bored into hers, and for the first time Sheila understood what it meant to be trapped. Truly, completely trapped. "I don't need your consent, Miss Stephen. I'm offering you a choice because it's more efficient than the alternative, but make no mistake, you will pay this debt. The only question is how many people suffer while you decide." Sheila's breath came in short, sharp bursts. Her hands trembled with rage so pure it burned. This man, this monster, had mapped her entire life, found every weak point, every person she'd die for. And he'd turned her love into chains. "You're a coward," she whispered, "hiding behind threats against innocent people. I'm practical." Mauricio returned to his desk, settling back into his chair like a king on a throne. "You have until tomorrow evening to decide. Marriage or consequences." His gaze held hers, unblinking. "Choose wisely." That night, Sheila sat on the fire escape of their tiny apartment, staring at the city lights and wondering how her life had become a cage. Jaden was inside, doing homework, oblivious to the fact that their world had just collapsed. She couldn't tell him, couldn't let him see her break. But alone, with the cold November wind biting at her skin, Sheila let herself cry for the first time since their mother died. She thought about law school, about the clinic she'd dreamed of opening for people drowning in predatory debt, people like her. About freedom, about choice, about the future she'd fought so hard to build. And she thought about Mauricio Abate's eyes, cold, ancient, utterly without mercy. By morning, her tears were gone, replaced by something harder, colder. She returned to that glass tower at 9 a.m., her jaw set, her eyes dry as stones. "I'll marry you," she said without preamble, without sitting, without giving him the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. "But don't mistake this for surrender." Mauricio looked up from his paperwork, unsurprised, like he'd known all along how this would end. "I don't need surrender, Miss Stephen. I need obedience." "Then you're going to be sorely disappointed." For the first time, Mauricio Abate smiled. It was a terrible expression, dark and promising and full of something that felt like danger wrapped in silk. "We'll see about that, Bella." And so, with a signature that felt like signing away her soul, Sheila Stephen became Sheila Abate, the wife of the Reaper. The woman who would either be destroyed by this man or destroy him first. The judge's chambers smelled like old paper and stale coffee. Sheila stood in a black dress she'd bought from a thrift store 3 years ago. Simple, unadorned, the kind of dress you wore to funerals. Which felt appropriate, because she was burying her old life today. Mauricio stood beside her in a charcoal suit that whispered Italian tailoring with every movement. His cologne was subtle, expensive, the kind that lingered in rooms after he left. She refused to look at him, refused to acknowledge the way his presence filled the small space like smoke, invasive and inescapable. "Miss Stephen, do you take this man?" "I have conditions," Sheila interrupted, her voice cutting through the perfunctory ceremony like a blade through silk. The judge blinked, confused. Mauricio's jaw tightened, barely perceptible, but she caught it. Good. Let him know she wouldn't make this easy. Jaden transfers to Riverside Military Academy within 48 hours. Full scholarship, security detail that reports to me, not you. And I continue law school without interference. No guards in my classrooms, no surveillance in the library, no interruptions during exams. Mauricio turned to face her fully, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. His eyes were obsidian in the dim light, ancient and unreadable. "You're negotiating the terms of your surrender?" "I'm negotiating the terms of your acquisition," Sheila corrected, meeting his gaze without flinching. "You wanted a wife. I'm giving you a legal binding. But Jaden stays protected and educated, and I finish what I started. Those are my terms." For a long moment, no one moved. The judge looked between them like he was watching a bomb decide whether to detonate. Then Mauricio smiled, that terrible, sharp expression that never reached his eyes. "Agreed." He turned back to the judge. "Continue." The words that followed felt distant, muffled, like Sheila was underwater. She heard herself say, "I do," and wondered if this was what drowning felt like. Slow, inevitable. Your lungs filling with something that would either kill you or transform you into something unrecognizable. When the judge pronounced them married, Mauricio leaned toward her. For one heart-stopping moment, Sheila thought he might kiss her, claim her mouth in front of witnesses like a brand of ownership. Her body went rigid, every muscle coiled to resist, but he only whispered, his breath warm against her ear, "Welcome to the family, Mrs. Abate." Then he straightened, slipped a simple silver band onto her finger without ceremony, and walked toward the door. The ring felt like ice against her skin. The Abate estate in upstate New York was a sprawling fortress, disguised as old money elegance, marble columns, silk wallpaper, chandeliers that caught the light and scattered it like broken stars. Everything gleamed with a polish that spoke of generations of wealth, and violence carefully concealed beneath beauty. Sheila stood in the foyer, her single suitcase at her feet, and felt the weight of the cage settling around her shoulders. "Your wing is on the 3rd floor, east side," Mauricio said, not looking at her as he handed his coat to a silent, stone-faced man who appeared from nowhere. "Separate entrance, separate key. I assume you'll want privacy for your studies." Sheila blinked, caught off guard. She'd expected resistance, expected him to assert control over every inch of her new prison. "I want a lock, one that only I control." "Done." He finally turned to face her, and something in his expression was different, harder, more clinical, like he was solving a problem rather than speaking to his wife. "Jaden's escort will arrive at your old apartment in 2 hours. He'll be at Riverside by nightfall. I want to call him. You can call him every day. Same time, monitored line." Before she could protest, he raised a hand. "For his protection, not your restriction. There are people who would use him to hurt you, which means they'd use him to hurt me. I don't allow vulnerabilities." The logic was sound, which made it more infuriating. Sheila lifted her chin. "Fine. Show me to my wing." "Marco will show you," Mauricio gestured to the stone-faced man. "I have business to attend to." He walked away without another word, his footsteps echoing on marble until they faded into the depths of the house. Sheila watched him go and felt something dangerous coil in her chest. Not relief, not exactly. Something closer to disappointment, which terrified her more than his presence ever could. Her wing was beautiful, in the way museums were beautiful. Untouchable, perfect, cold. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking manicured gardens, a 4-poster bed with silk sheets, a mahogany desk large enough to spread out case files and textbooks. There was even a small library, shelves filled with legal volumes that looked barely touched. "Mr. Abate had these delivered yesterday," Marco said, his voice surprisingly soft. "He said you'd need them for your studies." Sheila ran her fingers along the spines. Evidence law, constitutional theory, contract negotiations. Every book she'd mentioned wanting during her last semester, the ones she couldn't afford. Her throat tightened. "The lock is here." Marco demonstrated the deadbolt on her private entrance. Solid, new, with only one key. He placed it in her palm. "No one else has access. Mr. Abate's orders." When Marco left, Sheila locked the door behind him and stood in the center of her beautiful cage. She wanted to cry, wanted to scream, wanted to tear down the silk curtains and shatter the windows until the perfection bled into something honest and ugly. Instead, she unpacked her single suitcase, hung her 4 outfits in a closet designed for a wardrobe 50 times that size, and sat at the mahogany desk. She opened her constitutional law textbook to the chapter on involuntary servitude and forced herself to study. If she was going to survive this, she needed to be sharper than she'd ever been, smarter, harder, because Mauricio Abate had bought her body, but he hadn't bought her mind. And that would be his mistake. The knock came at midnight. Sheila had been staring at the same page for an hour, her mind too fractured to absorb the words. When she heard the soft rap against her door, every nerve in her body went electric. She didn't answer. Another knock, more insistent. Then his voice muffled through the wood. "Sheila, open the door." "No." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Silence. Then, "We need to establish boundaries. I thought that's what the lock was for." She heard him exhale, a sound that might have been frustration or amusement or something darker. I'm not here to force anything, but we are married. There are expectations. Sheila stood, crossed to the door, but didn't unlock it. Then let me make my expectations clear. You bought a legal contract. You did not buy access to my body. Not tonight, not ever. I will fulfill the social obligations of being your wife. I'll appear at your functions, I'll smile for your associates. I'll play the role. But my body is mine. That's the line. For a long moment there was only silence. Then Mauricio's voice came through, lower, rougher. You think I need to force women into my bed? I think you're a man who's used to taking what he wants. I am. His voice was so close now, like he was leaning against the door, separated from her by inches of wood and an ocean of power imbalance. But I don't take what isn't freely given. Not in that. Then we understand each other. Do we? There was something dangerous in his tone now. Something that made her pulse quicken despite herself. You're in my house, wearing my ring, carrying my name. You can lock your door, Bella, but you can't lock me out of your life. Eventually you'll have to face what this is. And what is this? Sheila challenged, her palm pressed flat against the door. A partnership, a transaction, a war. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Maybe all three. She felt the weight of his presence through the barrier, felt the heat of him like proximity to flame. Her body responded in ways her mind refused to acknowledge. A tightening low in her belly, her breath coming shorter, her skin hypersensitive to the silk of her nightgown. Good night, Mr. Abate, she said firmly, stepping back from the door. His laugh was dark, knowing. Good night, Mrs. Abate. His footsteps retreated down the hall. Sheila stayed frozen, listening until the sound faded completely. Only then did she release the breath she'd been holding. She returned to her bed but didn't sleep. Instead, she lay in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, and wondered how long she could maintain the walls between them. Wondered what would happen when those walls inevitably crumbled. Wondered if part of her, the part that responded to the danger in his voice, the command in his presence, was already betraying her. The ring on her finger caught the moonlight, cold and binding. Sheila closed her hand into a fist and promised herself that she would survive this, that she would find a way to turn this cage into a weapon. But deep in the quiet hours before dawn, she couldn't shake the memory of his voice through the door. The rough edge of want beneath the control. The way her body had responded like a traitor. She told herself it was fear. But fear had never felt quite like this. Electric, dangerous, alive. The argument started over breakfast. Sheila had been at the Abate estate for 3 days, maintaining careful distance, attending her online lectures from her locked wing, speaking to Jaden during their monitored daily calls. She'd learned the rhythms of the house. When Mauricio met with his associates in the study, when guards rotated shifts, when Marco brought her meals on silver trays she never requested. She was establishing her own patterns too. Every morning at 7, she went for a run on the treadmill in her wing's private gym. Every evening at 9, she studied at her desk until her eyes burned. She was building armor out of routine, creating distance out of discipline. But Mauricio had other plans. You're withdrawing from law school, he said, setting down his coffee cup with a precision that felt like violence restrained. They were in the main dining room. He'd insisted on these shared breakfasts, said it looked better for household staff to see them acting married. Sheila's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Excuse me? It's too exposed, too many variables I can't control. His tone was matter of fact, like he was discussing weather rather than dismantling her future. You'll finish your degree privately. I'll hire tutors. No. Sheila set down her fork carefully, fighting to keep her voice level. That was not our agreement. Our agreement was made before I fully assessed the risk. Things have changed. Nothing has changed. I go to class. Your guards follow me everywhere like well-dressed shadows. I come home. The system works. Mauricio leaned back in his chair, studying her with those ancient, calculating eyes. He was wearing a navy suit today, perfectly tailored, and she hated how it made him look like both a CEO and a predator. The system has vulnerabilities. You're a target now. My enemies will use you. Then teach me to defend myself instead of caging me. I'm protecting you. You're controlling me. Sheila stood abruptly, her chair scraping against marble. There's a difference. His jaw tightened. That telltale sign she'd learned meant his control was slipping. "Sit down, Sheila. I'm not your soldier." But even as she said it, she remained standing, refusing to retreat. Mauricio stood too, and suddenly the vast dining room felt impossibly small. He circled the table with that predatory grace, stopping just close enough that she had to tilt her head back to hold his gaze. "You are my wife. In my world, that means something." "In my world," Sheila said, her voice low and sharp. "I'm a lawyer first. That's my currency. That's what I bring to this partnership. You take that away, and what exactly do I become? Your decorative prisoner?" Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or grudging respect. "You're impossible. I'm educated. There's a difference." For a long moment, they stood there, the air between them charged with challenge and something darker, more complicated. Then Mauricio turned away, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair in a gesture so human it startled her. "You go to class," he finally said. "But Luca and Marco accompany you. Inside the building, not just outside. Non-negotiable." It wasn't what she wanted, but it was a concession. Sheila recognized the tactical value of small victories. "Fine. And you carry this?" He pulled something from his pocket. A slim phone, expensive-looking, black as obsidian. Encrypted line. "Speed dial 1 reaches me directly. You sense any threat, any discomfort, you call immediately." Sheila took the phone, their fingers brushing in the exchange. The contact was brief, electric, and she pulled away like touching flame. "I'm not helpless. I know." His voice was quiet, intense. "That's what worries me." The classes were harder, with guards looming in the back of the lecture hall. Sheila could feel every stare, hear every whispered speculation. The law student who'd married into the Mafia, the black girl who'd become the Reaper's wife. The rumors swirled around her like smoke, but she kept her head down, took meticulous notes, argued cases with a precision that made her professors nod in approval. If they noticed the two men in expensive suits watching her every move, they said nothing. Fear had its own language, and everyone at Columbia Law knew not to ask questions about Mauricio Abate's business. It was after her contract law seminar that she found the opening she'd been waiting for. Professor Delgado had lectured on RICO statutes, the legal framework designed to prosecute organized crime. Sheila had listened with razor focus, committing every detail to memory. When class ended, she'd lingered behind, asking careful questions about precedent, about enforcement patterns, about the ways sophisticated criminal organizations structured themselves to avoid prosecution. That evening, she left printed case files on Mauricio's desk. United States v. Gambino, United States v. Salerno, United States v. Gotti. Every major RICO prosecution from the past 4 decades, highlighted and annotated with her own legal analysis. She didn't say a word, just left them there like landmines and returned to her wing. The next morning, the files were gone. Mauricio didn't mention them at breakfast, but she caught the way his eyes tracked her movements, newly wary, newly calculating, like he was reassessing exactly what kind of weapon he'd brought into his house. Good. Let him wonder. The real rebellion came 3 days later. Mauricio was on the phone in his study, door open, speaking rapid Italian to someone on the other end. Sheila had been walking past, intending to head to her wing, when she heard the conversation. Most people assumed she only spoke English. They were wrong. She'd taken Italian for 3 years in undergrad, had a gift for languages, had spent hours with Professor Rossi practicing pronunciation until her accent was nearly flawless. It was a skill she'd kept quiet, knowing that people revealed their truths when they thought you couldn't understand them. Now, she slowed her steps, pretending to examine a painting in the hallway while she listened. "Giovanni's still pushing on the port contracts," Mauricio was saying, his voice tight with controlled anger. "He thinks I don't see his play, but I'm not my father. Tell Lorenzo I want the full accounting by Friday or he'll answer for the shortfall personally." Lorenzo. The consigliere she'd seen at the house twice, smooth-voiced and calculating, always watching her with eyes that made her skin crawl. "No, I don't trust it. Something's wrong with the numbers. 2 million vanished between Brooklyn and Staten Island, and nobody has answers." Pause. "Zach's being too quiet. That worries me more than his threats ever did." Sheila committed every word to memory, her mind already cross-referencing names and figures. Then she walked away before Mauricio could sense her presence. That night, she started building her own file. Names, dates, the fragments of information she could glean from careful observation and selective listening. She wasn't sure yet what she'd do with the intelligence, but knowledge was power. And in this house, power was survival. At breakfast the next morning, Mauricio spoke to Marco in Italian, something about adjusting security rotations. When Marco left, Sheila responded, in perfect Italian, asking if the changes would affect her class schedule. Mauricio's coffee cup froze halfway to his lips. "You speak Italian?" It wasn't a question. Fluently, Sheila confirmed in English, meeting his stunned gaze with calm defiance. "You should probably assume I understand everything you say. Just a thought." For one long, breathless moment, Mauricio just stared at her. Then he laughed, a real laugh, surprised and genuine, and she hated how the sound transformed his face, made him look younger, more human, devastatingly attractive in a way that made her pulse quicken. "Cristo," he muttered, shaking his head. "You're dangerous." "I'm educated," Sheila corrected, echoing her earlier words. "There's a difference." "No," Mauricio said, his eyes locking onto hers with sudden intensity. "In your case, they're the same thing." The threat came on a Tuesday. Sheila was walking from the library to the parking lot where Marco waited with the car. Luca trailed behind her, professional and distant. The Columbia campus was busy at this hour. Students rushing between classes, professors arguing about theory, the ordinary chaos of academic life. She didn't notice the black sedan until it was too late. It pulled up alongside her too fast, too smooth, and Sheila's instincts screamed danger before her conscious mind could process why. She turned, reaching for the phone Mauricio had given her, but hands were already grabbing her. Rough, efficient, professional. Luca moved like lightning, gun appearing from nowhere, but there were 3 of them, and they moved with military precision. One held a cloth over her mouth, chemical sweet, and Sheila's vision started to blur. She bit down hard, tasting blood, and heard someone curse. Fought like her mother had taught her, knees, elbows, anything to break free. But they were stronger, trained, and the world was tilting sideways. Then gunfire cracked the air. The hands released her abruptly. Sheila hit the pavement hard, her palms scraping concrete, her lungs burning as she gasped for clean air. Through the haze, she saw Mauricio. Appeared from nowhere, moving with lethal grace, his gun an extension of his hand. 2 shots, precise and controlled. 2 bodies dropped. The third attacker tried to run, but Mauricio was on him in seconds, slamming him against the sedan with controlled brutality. "Who sent you?" His voice was death itself, cold and final. The man spat blood, grinning through broken teeth. "Giovanni says hello, Abate. Says your pretty wife would look good in his bed instead of yours." Mauricio's fist connected with the man's jaw with such force, Sheila heard bone crack. The attacker crumpled, unconscious before he hit the ground. Then Mauricio was in front of her, his hands. Those elegant, scarred hands, surprisingly gentle as they cupped her face. "Are you hurt?" "Sheila, look at me. Are you hurt?" "I'm fine," she managed, though her voice shook. "You're bleeding." His thumb brushed her scraped palm, and something in his expression turned murderous. "They touched you. They put their hands on you." "Maurizio." She'd never used his first name before, and it stopped him cold. "I'm okay. Just scraped knees and pride." But he wasn't listening. He pulled her against him, one arm banded around her waist like steel, the other hand cradling the back of her head. She could feel his heart hammering against her cheek, could smell gunpowder and expensive cologne and something uniquely him. "Giovanni wanted to collect on your debt," he said quietly, his lips brushing her temple. "There are men in this city who would have used you in ways that would have destroyed you, who would have sold you to worse. I married you to shield you from a life worse than this." Sheila pulled back enough to see his face. His jaw was tight, his eyes blazing with barely controlled fury. But beneath the rage, she saw something else. Something that looked almost like fear. "You married me to control the asset," she said, testing. "I married you because you're worth controlling," Mauricio corrected. Then softer, almost vulnerable. and because letting Giovanni have you was unacceptable. The admission hung between them, heavy with implications. Sheila's breath caught. She'd thought this was purely transactional, debt, collateral, power plays. But the way he held her now, protective and possessive and something deeper, suggested complications she wasn't prepared for. "Take me home," she whispered. Mauricio nodded, his hand finding hers, his thumb brushing her scraped palm with devastating gentleness. "I'll always take you home, Bella. Always." As Marco pulled up with the car and Luca worked to contain the crime scene, Sheila let Mauricio guide her into the back seat. He kept her hand clasped in his the entire drive, his grip firm and grounding, and she didn't pull away. The cage was also a shield. The truth settled into her bones like a physical weight. She'd been so focused on the prison that she'd missed the protection. So determined to maintain her independence that she'd failed to see that Mauricio's control came with a terrifying kind of devotion. And as they drove through Manhattan toward the estate, Sheila felt the first crack form in her armor, felt the dangerous warmth of his hand in hers, and knew with absolute certainty that she was no longer fighting just to survive this marriage. She was fighting not to surrender to it. The screaming woke her at 3 a.m. Sheila bolted upright, her heart slamming against her ribs. For one disoriented moment she thought the attackers had found the estate, that Giovanni had made good on his threat. Then she heard Mauricio's voice, sharp with command, and Marco's response, and her legal mind clicked into crisis mode. She threw on a robe over her silk nightgown and unlocked her door. The hallway blazed with emergency lighting. Men in various states of dress rushed toward the east wing, and she followed on instinct, her bare feet silent on marble. The scene in Mauricio's private study was controlled chaos. Blood soaked into an expensive Persian rug. A man. Rocco, she recognized him from dinners, one of Mauricio's top enforcers, lay on the leather couch, his shirt cut away, a wound in his abdomen pumping blood with each shallow breath. "Ambulance is 12 minutes out," someone said. "He'll be dead in 5, Mauricio responded, his voice clipped. He was pressing a towel against the wound, his hands steady despite the gore. "Where the hell is Zach?" "Zach's in Philadelphia. Can't get back in time." Sheila pushed through the crowd of armed men before her brain could catch up to her body. "Move." Mauricio's head snapped up. "Sheila, get out. I can help." She dropped to her knees beside the couch, assessing the wound with clinical detachment. Entry wound, no exit. The bullet was still inside. Bleeding was arterial but not immediately fatal if she could control it. "I need clean towels, boiled water, a sewing kit, and vodka. Now." "Sheila, my father was a field medic before he was anything else." The words came out bitter, sharp. "He taught me emergency stabilization when I was 14. Said I needed to know how to keep people alive when hospitals weren't an option. I thought he meant camping accidents." She locked eyes with Mauricio. "Get me what I need, or watch him die. Your choice." For one heartbeat, Mauricio hesitated. Then he barked orders, and suddenly men were moving with purpose. The next 20 minutes existed outside of time. Sheila's hands moved with remembered precision, packing the wound, applying pressure, talking to Rocco in a low, steady voice to keep him conscious and focused. When the supplies came, she sterilized the needle from the sewing kit with vodka, threaded it with hands that refused to shake, and began the delicate work of closing the wound. "This is going to hurt," she warned Rocco. "Can't hurt worse than getting shot," he managed, his voice thread. "Wanna bet?" But she smiled grimly and began to suture. The room had gone silent except for Rocco's labored breathing and Sheila's quiet instructions. She was aware of Mauricio watching from the shadows, his presence a weight against her shoulders. Aware of how this looked. The lawyer wife on her knees in blood-soaked silk, playing surgeon while the Reaper's soldiers watched like she'd conjured magic. When she finished, she sat back on her heels, exhaling slowly. The wound was closed, packed, and bandaged. Not pretty, but functional. Rocco's breathing had steadied, his color improving fractionally. "Ambulance is here," Marco announced from the doorway. "Good." Sheila stood on shaking legs, her hands covered in blood, her robe ruined. "Tell them it's a through and through, no major organs hit, wound is stabilized. They'll probably want to do surgery anyway to check for internal damage, but he'll make it to the hospital." Mauricio moved then, crossing to her in 3 long strides. His hands closed around her shoulders, and she felt the tremor running through him. Fury or fear or both. "Where did you learn that?" "I told you. My father. Your father was a degenerate gambler who sold you to pay his debts." His voice was dangerously quiet. "Try again." Sheila met his gaze without flinching. "My father was a lot of things. A field medic was one of them. He served in Afghanistan before he fell apart. The camping trips were his way of passing on skills he said every Stephen should have." Her laugh was bitter. "Turns out keeping mobsters alive is a transferable skill." The paramedics arrived, efficiently loading Rocco onto a gurney. As they worked, Rocco grabbed Sheila's wrist with surprising strength. "Grazie, Mrs. Abate. I won't forget this." "Just heal," Sheila said softly. "And next time, wear Kevlar." When they were gone, and the study slowly emptied, Sheila found herself alone with Mauricio. The adrenaline was fading, leaving her shaky and cold. She looked down at her blood-covered hands and felt the first wave of delayed shock hit. "Come," Mauricio said quietly, his hand gentle at the small of her back. "Let's get you cleaned up." He led her to his private bathroom, all black marble and gold fixtures, and turned on the shower. Steam filled the space. He started to leave, give her privacy, but Sheila caught his wrist. "Stay." The word came out barely above a whisper. "Just don't leave." Mauricio's eyes searched hers, and whatever he saw there made him nod. He turned away, giving her space to strip off the ruined robe and nightgown, to step under the hot water. She watched the blood swirl down the drain. Rocco's blood, evidence of violence, proof of the world she'd married into. She didn't realize she was crying until Mauricio's voice came through the steam. "You did well tonight." "I saved a hitman's life," Sheila said, her voice breaking. "That's what I've become." "You saved a good man's life," Mauricio corrected. "Rocco has a wife, 3 daughters. You gave them their father back." The information hit her harder than expected. She'd been thinking in abstracts. The mafia, the violence, the moral compromise. But 3 daughters with a father because she'd known how to thread a needle. That was concrete. That was real. When she finally emerged, wrapped in one of Mauricio's shirts because she couldn't face returning to her wing in her ruined clothes, she found him sitting on the edge of his bed, his head in his hands. He looked up when she entered, and the expression on his face was raw, unguarded. "I owe you more than I can repay," he said quietly. "You don't owe me anything. I did what anyone would do." "No." He stood, crossing to her. "Most people would have walked away. Let someone else's blood stain someone else's hands. You didn't hesitate. You just acted." His hand cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing away a water droplet that might have been from the shower or might have been a tear. "You're extraordinary, you know that?" Sheila's breath caught. They were too close, the space between them charged with something dangerous and inevitable. She could smell him. Clean soap and expensive cologne, and underneath, something uniquely masculine that made her body respond in ways her mind refused to acknowledge. "Maurizio," she whispered, and his name on her lips felt like surrender. "I know." His forehead touched hers, his breath warm against her mouth. "I know, Bella. This is complicated." "Impossible," she corrected. "Maybe." His hand slid into her damp hair, tilting her face up. "But right now, in this moment, I want to kiss you. And this time, it wouldn't be for show or contracts or anything except that you're standing in my shirt looking fierce and fragile, and I can't think of anything else." Sheila should have said no, should have maintained the boundaries, kept the walls intact. But her armor had cracks now, and through those cracks want flooded in, hot and undeniable. "Then kiss me," she breathed. Maurizio's mouth claimed hers with a hunger that stole her breath. Not gentle, not testing. This was claiming possession, months of tension finally breaking through control. His hands fisted in her damp hair, angling her head for deeper access, and Sheila opened for him, meeting his intensity with her own. She'd been kissed before, but never like this. Never with the sense that if they didn't get closer, skin to skin, they might shatter from the need. His shirt, her only covering, became an impediment. Maurizio's hands found the buttons, his fingers surprisingly dexterous, despite the tremor of want running through them both. When the fabric parted, cool air hit her heated skin, and she gasped against his mouth. "Tell me to stop," he rasped, his hands skimming her ribs, her waist, mapping her body like territory he was claiming. "Tell me this isn't what you want, and I stop. But lie to me, Sheila, and I'll know." She couldn't lie, not when her body was arching into his touch, not when her hands were pulling at his shirt, desperate for skin. "Don't stop," she whispered against his throat. "Don't you dare stop." What followed existed outside of language. Maurizio lifted her easily, her legs wrapping around his waist as he carried her to his bed. Their bed, in this moment. Clothes disappeared between kisses that tasted like surrender and conquest simultaneously. When he finally pressed into her, filling her completely, Sheila's back arched off the mattress, a cry escaping her lips that was equal parts pleasure and something deeper, more profound. Like a lock clicking open, like coming home to a place she'd never known existed. Maurizio moved with controlled intensity, his hands gripping her hips, his mouth hot against her throat. "Mine," he growled against her skin. "Say it." "Yours," Sheila gasped, her nails raking down his back. "God help me, yours." The surrender tasted like ashes and honey. The pleasure built in waves, cresting higher each time until Sheila shattered, Maurizio's name torn from her throat like prayer and curse combined. He followed moments later, his body going rigid, his face buried in her neck as he found his own release. In the aftermath, they lay tangled together, breathing hard, skin damp with sweat and satisfaction. Maurizio's hand traced lazy patterns on her spine, and Sheila felt the magnitude of what they'd done settling over her like a weight. She'd crossed the line, surrendered not just her body but something more essential. And lying there in his arms, feeling his heartbeat steady beneath her palm, she couldn't bring herself to regret it. "This doesn't change anything," she whispered into the darkness. Maurizio's chest rumbled with quiet laughter. "Liar. I'm serious. Tomorrow we go back to." "Tomorrow," he interrupted, his arms tightening around her. "Tomorrow we figure out how to navigate this. Tonight, just let it be what it is." Sheila closed her eyes, exhaustion and emotion pulling her toward sleep. As she drifted off in the Reaper's arms, she thought about cages and shields, about violence and healing, about how the man who'd bought her was becoming the man she couldn't imagine leaving. And that terrified her more than any threat Giovanni could make. The next morning brought consequences wrapped in expensive suits. Sheila woke alone in Mauricio's bed, the sheets cool where his body had been. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the evidence of last night. Discarded clothes, the faint scent of sex and cologne, the ache between her thighs that was equal parts pleasure and reminder. She sat up, pulling the silk sheet around herself, and found a note on the pillow beside her. His handwriting was elegant, controlled, like everything about him. Had to handle Giovanni's response. "Marco has clothes for you. Stay in the estate today, please." The please felt like a concession, like he knew she'd resist the command and was trying negotiation instead. Sheila crumpled the note in her fist and headed for the shower. She needed to think. Needed to process what had happened between them and what it meant for the careful balance she'd been maintaining. But every time she tried to build the walls back up, she remembered the way he'd looked at her, not like a possession, but like something precious and dangerous he couldn't quite believe he was holding. Damn him. Damn her for letting those walls crack. When she returned to her wing, she found a black folder on her desk. No note this time, just financial records, the ones she'd asked for weeks ago, the proof of her father's debt. Only these were different, less redacted, more detailed. Sheila's legal mind kicked into gear immediately. She spread the documents across her desk, cross-referencing account numbers, tracking the flow of money. Her father had borrowed $10 million, yes, but the interest calculations were wrong. Inflated by exactly $2 million over 18 months. Someone had cooked the books, made the debt larger than it should have been. Her heart started racing as she dug deeper, following the paper trail with the precision her professors had drilled into her. The shell company that processed the interest payments traced back to offshore accounts, and those accounts had one authorized signatory, Lorenzo. The consigliere. Sheila sat back, her mind spinning. Lorenzo had been skimming, inflating debts to pocket the difference, which meant her father's debt should have been $8 million, not 10, which meant she'd been sold for $2 million that didn't exist. The fury that rolled through her was incandescent. But beneath the rage was something colder, more calculated. This was leverage. This was power. If Lorenzo was stealing from Mauricio, he was a liability. And liabilities in this world didn't last long. But she couldn't confront Mauricio directly. Not without proof. Not without understanding why these records had appeared now, less redacted, like someone wanted her to find exactly what she'd found. Was this a test? A trap? Or was Mauricio showing her trust in the only way he knew how, by giving her weapons? The knock on her door made her jump. She quickly gathered the documents, sliding them into her law school bag before calling out, "Come in." Marco entered, carrying a garment bag. "Mr. Abate requests your presence at dinner tonight. The consigliere and his wife will be attending." Lorenzo, of course. Sheila's mind raced through possibilities, strategies, the careful game she'd need to play. "Tell him I'll be there." When Marco left, Sheila opened the garment bag. Inside was a dress that stole her breath, deep emerald silk that would hug every curve, elegant and lethal. A dress designed to make her look like she belonged at Mauricio's side, like she was his equal, not his acquisition. She hated how much she wanted to wear it. Dinner was an exercise in controlled warfare. Sheila wore the emerald dress like armor, her natural hair swept into an elegant updo that her mother would have loved. She'd applied makeup with precision, highlighting her brown skin, making her eyes sharp and assessing. When she descended the stairs, she felt every eye in the foyer track her movement. Mauricio waited at the bottom, devastating in a charcoal suit. But it was his expression that made her breath catch. Raw appreciation mixed with something darker, more possessive. Like he was remembering exactly how she'd looked beneath him last night, crying his name. "Bella," he murmured, offering his arm. "You're stunning." "I'm strategic," Sheila corrected, but she took his arm, letting him guide her toward the formal dining room. Lorenzo and his wife were already seated. The consigliere was mid-50s, silver-haired, with the kind of smile that never reached calculating eyes. His wife was younger, decorative, and clearly trained to speak only when spoken to. "Mrs. Abate," Lorenzo said, standing as they entered. "What a pleasure. I've heard remarkable things about your legal acumen." "Have you?" Sheila settled into her chair with practiced grace. "I wasn't aware my studies were worth remarking on. A woman who can suture a bullet wound and argue constitutional law?" Lorenzo's smile widened. "That's worth remarking on." So he knew about last night. Of course he did. In this house, information was currency. The dinner proceeded with careful civility. Multiple courses, wine worth more than Sheila had ever paid for a full semester of school, conversation that danced around the reality of what these men did for a living. But Sheila watched Lorenzo carefully, noting the way his eyes tracked the servers, the subtle tension when Mauricio mentioned upcoming port contracts. "I've been reviewing the Brooklyn accounts," Mauricio said casually, cutting into his steak. "There's a discrepancy I'd like you to explain, Lorenzo." Lorenzo didn't flinch. "What sort of discrepancy?" $2 million. Vanished over 18 months in interest inflation. The temperature in the room dropped. Sheila felt Mauricio's hand find hers under the table, his grip firm and grounding. A warning or reassurance, she wasn't sure. "I'll look into it immediately," Lorenzo said smoothly. "Probably an accounting error." "Probably," Mauricio agreed. But his tone suggested he believed nothing of the sort. The rest of the dinner was excruciating. Sheila played her part. The elegant wife, the supportive partner, while her mind raced through contingencies. Lorenzo knew she'd found something, knew she was dangerous. The way he watched her now was different, calculating, like he was measuring her for a threat. When Lorenzo and his wife finally left, Sheila exhaled slowly. Mauricio's hand was still clasping hers, his thumb stroking her knuckles in a gesture that was becoming familiar, grounding. "You gave me those records," Sheila said quietly. "You wanted me to find the discrepancy. I wanted to see what you'd do with it." Mauricio turned to face her fully. "You could have confronted me, demanded answers, used it as leverage for your freedom. Instead, I stayed quiet and watched him squirm. Sheila met his gaze. Because I'm learning how this world works. Information is more valuable than confrontation. Exactly. His hand cupped her face, and the pride in his expression made something warm unfurl in her chest. You're learning, Bella, faster than I expected. Is he the threat? Sheila asked. Is Lorenzo the one who… I don't know yet, Mauricio interrupted. But I needed someone I trust to verify what I suspected. Someone with the legal mind to follow the trail without being clouded by loyalty or fear. So you used me. I partnered with you, he corrected. There's a difference. Sheila wanted to be angry, wanted to feel manipulated, used, turned into his weapon. But looking at him now, at the way he watched her like she was solving a puzzle he'd been struggling with for months, she realized she didn't feel used. She felt valued, seen. Like her mind was as desirable as her body, and that was more dangerous than any physical want. We need to leave, Mauricio said abruptly. Lorenzo knows you found something. Giovanni's still circling. New York is becoming too volatile. Leave where? Sicily. My ancestral home. His eyes held hers. Where I can protect you while we figure out who I can trust. And what if I don't want to? Then I'll lock you in your wing and pray that's enough to keep you safe. His voice was rough. But I'd rather have you with me, where I can see you, touch you, know you're breathing. The confession was raw, unguarded. Sheila's breath caught. This was the man beneath the Reaper, the one who'd held her through the night, who'd trusted her with his organization's secrets, who looked at her like she was both his salvation and his ruin. How long? She asked. As long as it takes. Sheila thought about Jaden, safe at Riverside, about her law classes that could be managed remotely, about the fact that staying in New York meant being a target for men like Lorenzo and Giovanni, while going to Sicily meant being alone with Mauricio in his domain. The cage or the unknown. The familiar danger or the promise of something that might be partnership, might be more. When do we leave? She asked. Mauricio's smile was slow, devastating. Tomorrow. Pack light. Everything you need, I'll provide. That night, Sheila didn't return to her wing. She stayed in Mauricio's suite, and when he reached for her in the darkness, she didn't resist. Their lovemaking was different this time. Slower, deeper, like they were memorizing each other for the war ahead. And when she woke in his arms the next morning, watching Sicily-bound sunrise paint the room in gold, Sheila admitted the truth she'd been avoiding. She was falling for the Reaper. And that made her more vulnerable than any debt ever could. The Palazzo Abate rose from the Sicilian coast like something out of a Gothic novel, ancient stone, iron gates, gardens that had been tended for centuries. Beautiful and isolated, a fortress disguised as old-world elegance. Sheila stood on the terrace of her suite, watching the Mediterranean crash against cliffs below, and felt the weight of history pressing down. This was Mauricio's ancestral home, the place where his family had consolidated power, where violence had been committed in the name of honor for generations. She'd been here for 3 days. 3 days of learning the palazzo's rhythms, meeting staff who watched her with curiosity and caution, spending nights in Mauricio's bed where neither of them pretended anymore that this was just convenience. But tonight felt different, heavy with anticipation, like storm clouds gathering. She found him in his study, a room of dark wood and leather, maps of shipping routes and business holdings spread across the massive desk. He was on the phone, speaking rapid Italian, and she waited in the doorway until he noticed her. When he did, his expression softened. "Momento," he said into the phone, then covered it with his hand. "Can't sleep? Too much thinking." Sheila crossed to the window, staring out at moonlit gardens. "Tell me about your father." The silence stretched long enough that she thought he might refuse. Then she heard him end the call, heard his footsteps approaching until he stood behind her, close enough that she could feel his warmth. "My father was supposed to be untouchable," Mauricio said quietly. "Don Abate, the Sicilian king. He built this empire from nothing, consolidated the families, made us a force that even the government feared. What happened? His consigliere betrayed him, sold information to the feds, pocketed millions, and disappeared before anyone realized the damage." His hand settled on her shoulders, heavy and grounding. "My father died in prison. Heart attack, they said. But everyone knew it was shame that killed him." the humiliation of being outmaneuvered by someone he trusted. Sheila turned to face him, saw the old pain etched in the lines around his eyes. That's why you can't trust Lorenzo. That's why I can't trust anyone. He cupped her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. Except maybe you. Why me? I was forced into this. I have every reason to destroy you. Because you're honest about your hatred, Mauricio said simply. Everyone else smiles and lies. You glare and tell the truth. That's more valuable than loyalty built on fear. Before Sheila could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his entire expression shifted. Sharp, dangerous, the Reaper returning in an instant. They're coming, he said. Giovanni and Lorenzo. They've been waiting for me to isolate myself, and I just gave them the perfect opportunity. Sheila's heart kicked into overdrive. How long? Hours. Maybe less. He was already moving, pulling weapons from hidden compartments, his movements precise and practiced. I'm calling my men. We'll fortify. No. Sheila's voice cut through his planning. You said this was your ancestral home. That means you know every stone, every passage. We use that. We turn this palazzo into a trap. Mauricio stopped, staring at her. You want to fight? I want to win, Sheila corrected. And running makes you look weak, makes you look like your father. The comparison hit like a physical blow. She saw it land, saw him recalculate everything. What are you thinking? Sheila moved to his desk, spreading out the palazzo blueprints. Her mind was racing, years of studying strategy and law converging into something practical and deadly. How many are loyal to you here? 15 of my men, maybe 10 of the house staff. And how many will Lorenzo bring? 30, maybe more. Giovanni will match that number. 60 against 25. Bad odds. But Sheila studied the blueprints, her finger tracing the old structures, the vulnerabilities. These support columns, the ones in the east wing, their original construction? 14th century. Why? Her mind was clicking through possibilities, remembering the skills her father had taught her during those camping trips. Skills she'd thought were paranoid survival training, but now recognized as tactical demolition basics. Because if we can control the collapse, she said slowly, we can cut off their primary access route. Funnel them into kill zones where your men have advantage. Mauricio grabbed her shoulders, his eyes blazing. Where did you learn tactical engineering? My father, Sheila admitted. I told you he taught me field medicine. He also taught me how to identify structural vulnerabilities, how to set charges, how to think like someone planning an assault. She met his fierce gaze. I thought he was crazy. Turns out he was training me for exactly this. Cristo, Mauricio breathed. Your father wasn't just a medic. He was. Special forces. Yeah. The bitterness in her voice was acid. Before he was a drunk gambler who sold his daughter, he was a tactical genius who taught her how to blow things up. Funny how life works. Mauricio kissed her then. Hard, possessive, desperate. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against hers. We survived this, and I'm never letting you go. Understand? Survive first, Sheila said. Promises later. The next 4 hours were a blur of preparation. Mauricio's men worked with military precision, following Sheila's tactical layout like she'd been planning sieges her whole life. They placed strategic charges on the east wing support columns, positioned marksmen in overlooking windows, created fallback positions that would let them move through the palazzo like ghosts. Sheila coordinated it all, her legal mind applied to warfare, finding loopholes in architecture the same way she found them in contracts. Mauricio watched her with something like awe, occasionally interjecting corrections but mostly letting her command. You're terrifying, he murmured as she directed 2 of his men to reinforce the study door. I'm prepared, Sheila corrected. There's a difference. The attack came at dawn. Sheila was in the study with Mauricio when the first explosion rocked the western gate. Gunfire erupted immediately, controlled bursts from Lorenzo's men, the signature sound of a professional assault. They're early, Mauricio bit out, grabbing his weapon. Stay here. No. Sheila grabbed the detonator she'd been keeping close. I need to see the approach. If they're not using the east corridor, this whole plan fails. They moved together through the palazzo. Mauricio's men falling into formation around them. Through windows, Sheila saw muzzle flashes, saw attackers spreading through the gardens with military efficiency. Then she saw Lorenzo. Unmistakable, directing his men from the rear, pointing toward the East Wing access tunnel. "There," she breathed. "They're funneling toward the old wine cellars. That corridor connects directly to the family vault," Mauricio finished grimly. "Where I keep the real financial records. Lorenzo wants to destroy the evidence before I can expose him." "Perfect." Sheila's finger hovered over the detonator trigger. "How many in the corridor?" Marco was watching through binoculars. 20, maybe 25, all moving in formation. Mauricio looked at Sheila, and the question in his eyes was clear. Could she do this? Could she bring down centuries-old stone on living men, knowing some would die? Sheila thought about Jaden, about her future, about the man beside her who'd become something more than her captor. She thought about Giovanni's hands grabbing her, about Lorenzo's calculating smile, about her father selling her like she was nothing. "For the record," she said quietly, "I hate that this is who I'm becoming." "I know, Bella." Mauricio's hand covered hers on the detonator. "I'll carry this weight with you." Together, they pressed the trigger. The explosion was controlled, precise, exactly as Sheila had calculated. The East Wing support columns collapsed inward, bringing down the corridor ceiling in a cascade of ancient stone. Dust billowed through the palazzo, and for one long moment, everything went silent. Then the screaming started. "Move!" Mauricio commanded, and his men surged forward, using the chaos to their advantage. Gunfire erupted again, but this time it was different. Mauricio's forces picking off disoriented attackers, using superior position and knowledge of the palazzo to devastating effect. Sheila stayed in the study, monitoring communications, coordinating movements like a general commanding troops. Her hands shook, adrenaline and horror warring in her blood, but her voice stayed steady on the radio. 3 coming up the south stairs. Marco, intercept. Giovanni's trying to flank through the gardens. Send Luca's team. Someone's in the kitchens, probably trying to access the old servant passages. Mauricio kept returning to her between firefights, checking that she was safe, that she hadn't been hit by stray fire. Each time he looked at her differently, not like a wife or possession, but like a warrior he was honored to fight beside. By the time the sun fully rose, it was over. 15 of Lorenzo's men were dead, trapped in the collapsed corridor. Another 12 captured, disarmed, bound in the palazzo courtyard. Giovanni himself had fled when he realized the trap, disappearing into the Sicilian countryside like the coward he was. And Lorenzo? Lorenzo was on his knees in the study, blood dripping from a head wound, staring at Sheila with pure hatred. "You did this," he spat. "You destroyed everything." "No," Mauricio said coldly, pressing his gun to Lorenzo's temple. "You destroyed everything when you stole from me. When you inflated debts to line your pockets. When you tried to sell me out to Giovanni." He looked at Sheila, and the respect in his expression made her chest tight. She just exposed it. "She's a snake," Lorenzo snarled. "Just like her father. You don't even know the truth about the man who raised her." Mauricio's fist connected with Lorenzo's jaw with brutal precision. "Her father's sins are not hers, and you don't speak her name again." He turned to Marco. "Take him to the cellars. Make sure Giovanni's contacts know exactly why Lorenzo is being removed. I want it clear that betrayal has consequences." As Marco dragged Lorenzo away, Sheila stood on shaking legs. The adrenaline was crashing, leaving her hollow and nauseous. She'd coordinated an assault, brought down a building on living men, saved Mauricio's empire with tactics learned from a father she despised. She stumbled toward the bathroom, barely making it before she vomited, her body rejecting the violence, even as her mind accepted its necessity. Mauricio was there immediately, holding her hair, his hand steady on her back. When she finished, he cleaned her face with a damp cloth, his touch impossibly gentle. "I killed people," Sheila whispered. "I calculated how to kill them, and I did it." "You defended your home," Mauricio corrected. "You protected your family. There's a difference." "Is there?" Her eyes met his, desperate for absolution she didn't deserve. "Because right now, it feels like I'm becoming exactly what I feared." Like this world is changing me into someone I don't recognize. Mauricio pulled her against him, and she felt his heartbeat steady and strong beneath her palm. Then we changed together, he said quietly. Because you're not alone in this anymore. Whatever we become, Bella, we become it side by side. Sheila closed her eyes and let herself be held. Let herself admit that the cage had become home, that the man who'd bought her had become the only person she trusted completely. And that terrified her more than any siege ever could. The palazzo was a war zone, transformed into a crime scene. Mauricio's men worked methodically, documenting evidence, securing prisoners, containing the damage. Sheila sat in the study, wrapped in one of Mauricio's shirts, watching the controlled chaos through windows while her mind refused to stop replaying the moment she'd triggered that detonator. She'd saved them. She knew that intellectually, but emotionally she couldn't shake the weight of those deaths, couldn't unhear the screaming. Mrs. Abate. Marco appeared in the doorway holding something carefully. We found this in Lorenzo's pocket. Thought you should see it. He handed her a worn envelope, and Sheila's heart stopped. Her name was written across it in her father's handwriting. The same scrawl that had signed away her future, only older, more careful. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside was a letter, dated 5 years ago, and a photograph she'd never seen. Sheila, if you're reading this, I'm either dead or disappeared, and you're probably furious. You have every right to be. I was a coward who used you as insurance when I should have protected you. But you need to know the truth. I wasn't always the drunk you remember. 20 years ago, I was Special Forces, then federal agent, assigned to infiltrate the Abati organization. I gathered evidence, wore a wire, stole $2 million in marked bills as proof of money laundering. Then I met your mother, fell in love, wanted out. The feds refused, said I was in too deep. So I ran, took the money, changed my name, tried to disappear. But Mauricio's father found me, made a deal, the money for my silence. I paid him back $8 million over the years, working off the debt and the accumulated interest. I thought it was over. But when old Don Abate died, his son found the original records, found the shortfall Lorenzo had created to hide his own skimming. Mauricio came for the full $10 million, not knowing $2 million was fabricated. I panicked. Used the only leverage I had. You. Offered you as collateral because I thought Mauricio would settle for cash eventually. I was wrong. He wanted insurance that I wouldn't disappear again. Wanted a Steven in his house where he could control the variable. I'm not asking forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I need you to know, everything I taught you for this moment. For the day when you'd need to survive in a world that eats people like us. You're stronger than I ever was, baby girl. Smarter. You'll find a way to win where I only knew how to run. The keys and blueprints I left you will make sense eventually. Use them wisely. Trust your instincts. And know that even though I failed you in every way that mattered, I love you. Dad. Sheila read the letter 3 times, her vision blurring. The photograph showed her parents young and happy. Her father in military dress uniform, her mother radiant. Both of them looking at the camera like they believed the world couldn't touch them. The keys, the blueprints. She'd found them in her old acceptance letter, the one she'd grabbed during the chaos. At the time, she'd thought they were random, meaningless. But now, staring at the photograph's background, a building she recognized as the old federal courthouse, she understood. Her father had left her the keys to a federal safe deposit box. Evidence of his infiltration, probably. Proof of his deal with old Don Abate. Insurance against exactly this moment. Sheila? Mauricio's voice made her look up. He stood in the doorway, blood on his shirt, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. But his eyes were soft when they found her. What is it? She handed him the letter without speaking, watched him read it with increasing tension. When he finished, he was very still, very quiet. The kind of quiet that preceded volcanic fury. Your father was Agent Steven, he said finally. The informant who destroyed my family. Yes, the $2 million Lorenzo inflated. That was money my father paid your father off the books, to keep him silent about evidence that could have destroyed us. Yes. Mauricio crossed to the window, his back rigid with barely controlled rage. So this entire time, the debt, the marriage, you, all of it was about my father's paranoia that your father would resurface and destroy what was left of our organization. Yes, Sheila stood on shaking legs. I didn't know. I swear to God, Mauricio, I didn't. I know. He turned to face her, and the look in his eyes was devastating. You're as much a victim of his choices as I am. But Christo, Sheila, your father stole from my family, betrayed my father's trust, and I married his daughter. He laughed, bitter and broken. The universe has a sick sense of humor. So what now? Sheila's voice was steady despite the trembling in her hands. Do I become a prisoner again? Do you lock me away because of sins that aren't mine? Mauricio stared at her for a long moment. Then he crossed the room in 3 strides and kissed her. Hard, desperate, tasting like ash and need and something too complicated for words. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against hers. Now, he said roughly, now I choose you anyway. Because your father's betrayal doesn't define who you are. Because you saved my life tonight using skills he taught you. Because every reason I should hate you is also a reason to love you, and I'm tired of fighting it. Sheila's breath caught. Love? Love, Mauricio confirmed, his hands framing her face like she was something precious and breakable. Furious, complicated, probably going to destroy us both, love, but love nonetheless. The admission cracked something open in Sheila's chest. She'd been so focused on surviving, on maintaining boundaries, on not surrendering completely. But standing here in the wreckage of violence, with this man who'd seen her at her worst and darkest and still chose her, resistance felt pointless. I hate you, she whispered, but there was no heat in it. I know, Mauricio murmured, kissing her softly. Hate me while I rebuild this empire for you. Hate me while I make sure Jaden has everything he needs. Hate me while I fall asleep beside you every night for the rest of my life. That's not fair. Nothing about us is fair, Bella. That's what makes it real. They stood there, holding each other in the ruins of the siege, and Sheila let herself admit the truth. She'd fallen for the Reaper. The man who'd bought her, the man who'd threatened her family, the man who'd forced her into a marriage she never wanted. And somehow, impossibly, she wouldn't trade it for anything. The safe deposit box, she said against his chest. My father left keys, evidence of his original infiltration, proof of the money trail. Mauricio pulled back enough to see her face. You want to retrieve it? I want to destroy it, Sheila corrected. I want to erase the last connection between your family and mine. Start fresh, with nothing from the past hanging over us. And if it contains evidence I need, information about other betrayals, other threats, Sheila met his gaze steadily. Then we use it, but together, partners, not adversaries. Mauricio's smile was slow, devastating. Partners, he agreed. In everything. They left for New York the next day, leaving Marco to coordinate cleanup and damage control. The flight was silent, both of them processing the magnitude of what they'd learned, what they'd survived. But when they landed at a private airfield outside Manhattan, Mauricio didn't take her to the estate. Instead, he drove to a federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan, the same building from her father's photograph. Inside, they used the keys to access a safe deposit box registered under a false name. Inside were documents that told the complete story, her father's original infiltration, the evidence he'd gathered, the money trail showing old Don Abate's payoff, and one final letter, this one addressed to Mauricio. Sheila watched him read it, saw the play of emotions across his face. Anger, grief, something that might have been grudging respect. He apologizes, Mauricio said quietly. Says he never meant to destroy my father, that he was just trying to survive and protect your mother, that he hoped someday I'd understand that love makes people into monsters and heroes simultaneously. Do you? Sheila asked. Understand? Mauricio looked at her, and the truth in his eyes was naked and raw. I understand that I would have done worse to keep you, that every crime my family committed, I would commit again if it meant you stayed safe. So yes, I understand. They burned the documents in the fireplace of a hotel suite, watching her father's confession and Mauricio's father's sins turn to ash, erasing the past, choosing the future. And when Mauricio reached for her in the firelight, Sheila went to him without hesitation. Let him strip away her clothes and defenses simultaneously. Let him worship her body like benediction and claim it like conquest. Mine, he growled against her throat, his body pressing hers into the mattress. Yours, Sheila gasped, her nails raking down his back, marking him in return. But you're mine too, equally or nothing. Equally, Mauricio agreed, and the promise in his voice was binding as any vow. They made love surrounded by the ashes of their father's mistakes, building something new from the ruins. And when Sheila finally fell asleep in his arms, she felt at peace for the first time since that phone call had shattered her world. The cage had transformed into sanctuary. The captor had become partner, and she, the debt collateral, the sold daughter, had become the architect of her own empire. The transformation came with costs. Giovanni disappeared. Fled to Europe, rumor said, to avoid Mauricio's reach. But his absence created power vacuums that other families tried to fill. 3 attempts on Mauricio's life in as many months, each one closer than the last. Sheila stopped sleeping through the night. Started carrying the encrypted phone everywhere, her finger always hovering near speed dial 1. Started studying tactical manuals the way she once studied case law, preparing for scenarios she prayed would never come. The breaking point came on a Tuesday in May. Mauricio returned from a meeting in Brooklyn, his shirt soaked with blood that wasn't his. He walked into their bedroom. Their bedroom now, the pretense of separate wings abandoned months ago. And Sheila took one look at him before her carefully constructed control shattered. No more. Her voice cracked on the words. I can't do this. I can't watch you walk out that door every day wondering if you're coming back in a body bag. Mauricio stopped, his hands frozen on his blood-stained cuffs. Sheila, I killed people for you. The confession tore from her throat raw and jagged. I brought down that corridor knowing some wouldn't make it out. I did that because I believed we were building something worth the blood. But if you die, Mauricio, if they take you from me, her breath hitched. Then I destroyed my soul for nothing. He crossed to her in 3 strides, his hands framing her face with desperate gentleness despite the gore staining his clothes. Then help me change it. Not just the surface. Everything. Help me dismantle what my father built and create something that doesn't require your nightmares as payment. Sheila searched his eyes, saw the exhaustion there, the weight of generations pressing down. You'd give up the empire? For me? I'd give up everything for you. His thumb brushed away tears she hadn't realized were falling. The question is whether you trust me enough to rebuild it together. Legal, legitimate, ours. She thought about the girl who'd walked into his office 9 months ago, terrified and defiant, believing she had no choices. Thought about the woman she'd become. Harder, yes, but also more certain of her worth, her power, her capacity to reshape the world on her terms. I need guarantees, she said, her lawyer's mind asserting control over her emotional chaos. Jaden's security becomes permanent, not trust fund permanent, constitutional permanent. Papers filed, legal structures that survive even if we don't. Done. The legal aid clinic gets full funding, endowed, untouchable by anyone including you, already arranged. Mauricio pulled a folder from his jacket, hands leaving rust-colored smears on the manila. $5 million endowment, your name on the deed. Papers are ready for your signature. Sheila took the folder with trembling fingers, scanned the documents with practiced efficiency. Everything was exactly as she'd demanded during late-night arguments she'd thought he wasn't taking seriously. He'd been listening all along, planning, giving her the tools to make this marriage into something she could live with. One more thing, she said, meeting his gaze. I want partnership papers. Legal documentation that splits all business holdings 50-50. I won't be your wife in name while you hold all the power in practice. Something flickered across Mauricio's face. Surprise maybe, or calculation. Then his expression settled into something that looked almost like relief. You want legal control. I want equality. Sheila lifted her chin. You said you needed a partner, not a prize. Prove it. For a long moment they stood in the charged silence, the magnitude of what she was demanding settling between them. She was asking him to surrender the absolute control that had kept him alive, kept him feared. She was asking him to make himself vulnerable in ways his world considered fatal. Cristo, he breathed, and then he was kissing her. Desperate, consuming, tasting like copper and surrender. His hands fisted in her hair, angling her head for deeper access. And Sheila opened for him, swallowing his confession like communion. "You're terrifying, you know that? I'm your equal," she corrected against his mouth. "Or I'm nothing." Mauricio pulled back just enough to see her face, his eyes blazing with something too complicated for simple words. "Then be my equal, my partner, my queen." His forehead pressed against hers, his breath ragged. "Help me become the man who deserves you." They made love surrounded by blood-stained clothes and legal documents, building their future from the wreckage of his past. And when Sheila finally fell asleep in his arms, she felt the first stirrings of something that might be peace, or at least the possibility of it. The papers were signed by dawn. Mauricio kept his word about everything. 6 months later, Sheila stood in a conference room overlooking Lower Manhattan, conducting a virtual board meeting in flawless Italian, while Mauricio watched from the doorway like a man observing a miracle. She'd transformed everything. The shipping companies now operated as legitimate logistics firms, contracts with Fortune 500 companies replacing protection rackets. The security operations had been restructured, licensed, defensible in any court. Even the offshore investments, once money laundering operations, now functioned as complex but legal tax structures that her law professors would have admired. The criminal empire had become a business empire, and Sheila Stephen Abate was its architect. "Signora Abate," one of the Italian executives said through the video feed, his tone respectful in ways it hadn't been 6 months ago. "The Palermo shipping route is secured. Your contracts are unprecedented. Grazie, Antonio." Sheila's smile was controlled, professional, the smile of someone who knew exactly how much power she held. "I expect the quarterly reports by Friday. No delays." When she ended the call, she found Mauricio still watching her, something raw and unguarded in his expression. "What?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "You're magnificent." He crossed to her, his movements liquid despite the healing scar on his shoulder from the last assassination attempt, the one that had finally convinced him to step back from active operations. "Watching you command a room in Italian, dismantling century-old criminal structures and rebuilding them as legitimate business. Cristo, Bella. You're everything I never knew I needed." Sheila felt heat crawl up her neck despite herself. After everything they'd been through, he could still make her pulse quicken with a look. "I'm doing what you asked. Partnership. You're doing more than that." Mauricio reached into his pocket, pulled out a small black box that made her breath catch. "You're showing me what we could be. What we are." He opened the box. Inside sat a platinum ring. Simple, elegant, powerful. Nothing like the cold silver band he'd slipped on her finger in that judge's chambers a lifetime ago. Then Mauricio Abate did something she'd never imagined. He dropped to one knee. "Marry me again," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Not because I forced you, not because of debt or contracts or anything except that I choose you, every day, every moment, and I want you to choose me the same way." Sheila stared at him. This man who'd bought her, threatened her, forced her into a marriage she'd never wanted. The man who'd also protected her brother, funded her dreams, surrendered his absolute control to make her his equal. The man she'd somehow, impossibly, fallen in love with. "You're still a criminal," she said, but her voice was soft, almost teasing. Mauricio's smile was devastating, genuine, unguarded, the expression of a man who'd found something worth being vulnerable for. "I'm your figurehead. You're the real power here. We both know it. And you're okay with that? I love it." His hand found hers, thumb stroking her wrist where her pulse hammered. "I love watching you command a room. Love seeing these men who once dismissed you now scrambling to meet your deadlines. Love knowing that the woman who once promised to destroy me instead rebuilt me into something worth keeping." Sheila's breath caught. She thought about the girl she'd been. Terrified, defiant, trapped. Thought about the woman she'd become. Powerful, respected, feared in ways that had nothing to do with being anyone's wife and everything to do with being herself. "I never thought I'd say this," she whispered, cupping his face, feeling the scratch of stubble against her palm. "But I'm glad my father's debt brought me to you, not because of what you are, but because of what we became despite everything working against us. Is that a yes?" Sheila looked at the ring, then at the man holding it. The man who'd surrendered his empire to build something new with her. The man who knelt before her not in submission but in recognition, acknowledging that she was his equal in every way that mattered. On one condition. Her voice was steady, her lawyer's precision asserting itself even now. We are each other's. Equally or nothing. Equally, Mauricio agreed, slipping the ring onto her finger. Always. When he kissed her, it tasted like victory and surrender simultaneously. Two people who'd fought their way through violence and trauma and impossible choices to find something that looked remarkably like love. That night, they stood on the penthouse terrace overlooking the city. Sheila wore the new ring, her other hand entwined with Mauricio's, both of them watching lights glitter across Manhattan like fallen stars. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Giving up absolute control?" Mauricio pulled her closer, his arms banding around her waist from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "I didn't give up control, Bella. I shared it with the only person I trust completely. That's not loss. That's evolution." Sheila smiled, leaning back into his warmth. "They thought they were buying a wife," she murmured, her reflection in the window showing a woman transformed. Confident, powerful, exactly where she belonged. "But they gave me an empire instead." "No," Mauricio corrected, his voice a rumble against her back. "You took the empire, built it into something better. I just had the good sense to recognize a queen when she walked into my office and told me no one could own her." Sheila turned in his arms, looked up at the man who'd been her cage and her liberation simultaneously. "I love you," she said, the words still strange on her tongue but utterly true. "Even though you're impossible and infuriating and you still make unilateral decisions sometimes." "I love you too," he interrupted, kissing her softly. "Even though you argue with every order, question every decision, and regularly terrify my associates with your legal acumen." They stood there as Manhattan glittered below them. Two people who'd fought their way through impossible circumstances to claim something that looked remarkably like happiness. The debt was paid. The threats neutralized. The empire transformed. And Sheila Stephen Abate, the girl who'd been sold to save her father's sins, had become exactly what she'd promised that first night. Unconquerable, unbreakable, free. If you love stories where danger tastes like devotion and the only way out is through forbidden love, tell us in the comments. Which part of Sheila's transformation spoke to you? Her defiance? Her strategy? The moment she claimed her power? Hit that like button and subscribe for more stories where love is a battlefield, and the only way to win is to rewrite the rules entirely.